today we're going to talk about the key differences between being a freight broker, a freight agent, and a dispatch service. So let's take it at the top. What is a freight broker? A freight broker, and I'm going to start very fundamental. A freight broker is an intermediary that connects carriers and shippers and makes a match and a marriage between those two. So if a shipper has a load going from point A to point B and a broker charges them $1,000, they find a carrier to haul that load from point A to point B for, let's say, $800 or $900, making $100 to $200 margin. That's what a freight broker does. They are licensed by the FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, okay? There's a licensing process. You have to get an authority. It's not that complex, but you do need to be a licensed broker in order to independently operate as a freight broker. Now, that means you're going to be invoicing all your shippers. That means you're going to be doing all the collections, all the payments to carriers. You're going to have your own bond, all of that. That's if you are an independent licensed freight broker. All right. Now, that's number one. What is a freight agent? Now, when I speak of freight agents, I'm speaking in terms of independent freight agents, meaning they are typically solopreneurs or small businesses, independent contractors that work under the authority of a freight broker. So if you have a licensed freight broker here, okay, and he's got his license, his bond, he's authorized to broker freight in the United States through the FMCSA, you will have agents sometimes that will work underneath them in a contract with that broker. They'll be independent contractors. They're not employees, meaning they're not getting paid a salary. They're not getting paid. They're getting paid straight commission. So freight agents typically operate on straight commission that ranges typically between 50 and 70% of the profit on every load. So if you make $200 on a load, you're typically going to make somewhere between $100 and $140 as an agent on that load. Okay. Now, freight agents do not have to have an authority. They do not have to have a bond. They just have to work under a licensed freight broker. Okay. So that's what a freight agent is. That's what a freight broker is. Now, freight agents, again, their primary job is to find shippers, help assist them with their loads by finding trucks that match their loads. And then they see those loads from pickup all the way through to delivery, right? So they find shippers, they help them with their loads, they source carriers, they negotiate with those carriers, they dispatch the drivers, and they follow that shipment all the way through delivery to make sure it picks up and delivers on time in good condition with no problems, okay? So a freight agent's job is much smaller than a freight broker's job, which is a much larger set of responsibilities, okay? Now, what is an independent dispatch service? All right, so this is where there's a lot of confusion. Now, an independent dispatch service is not a freight agent, and they are not a freight broker. They are neither. An independent freight agent is typically a solopreneur, someone who's an independent contractor or small business owner that contracts with carriers, typically owner-operators or small fleets, to help find them loads. And typically what they do is they go to the load boards and they find loads from brokers. So they're not going direct to shippers. They're not developing shipper direct relationships. They're simply helping carriers find brokered loads and helping to set up the paperwork between the broker and the carrier. That's the primary difference. That's what a dispatch service does. Now, for doing that, they get a small percentage of each load. I don't know what the percentage is. I think it's maybe around 5% of the gross amount of the load. But the thing is, here's the challenge, right? The challenge is the FMCSA has said that independent dispatch services are illegal, all right? And what they've said is they've said that it's unauthorized brokering. because what they're really doing is they're brokering freight, they're co-brokering freight without an authority, because they're not operating under a broker, and they're not, they don't have their own authority. They're operating and brokering freight without an authority. So it's unauthorized brokering. It'd be like if I opened a business today as a freight broker and I didn't go to the FMCSA and get my license and my bond, follow all the steps, and then me just going out and brokering freight. Okay. Independent dispatch services, it's very gray area. Now, I know companies out there that are doing it, and I don't begrudge anybody how they make their living, but I will tell you a couple of things. Number one, independent dispatch services are risky, because there is a potential for you to be involved, dragged into a lawsuit. If there is a situation, if there's some sort of damage claims, if there's some sort of a catastrophic accident where there's a loss of life, and because you have no legal right to be brokering freight, it's going to put you in a very bad position. Okay. Number two, the FMCSA, you could be sued, you could come in, they could come in and shut you down. But the point is that that's the biggest difference between a freight broker. A freight broker is authorized by the FMCSA to legally broker freight in the United States. Now, as a broker, if you have a U.S. authority, you can broker freight inside the U.S., meaning, from a U.S. point to any other U.S. point. And you can also broker freight from the U.S. to an international point like Canada, for example, or Mexico. And you can also broker freight from Canada or Mexico into the US, okay? But it doesn't mean that you can broker freight inside of Canada. So if you had a load that picked up in Toronto and went to Montreal, you're not authorized to do that, because you are not a Canadian broker unless you have a Canadian authority and you've been authorized by the Canadian government, okay? The same thing goes for Canadian brokers. So if you are a Canadian broker, you can pick up a load in Canada and deliver it to the US. You can pick up a load in the US and deliver it to Canada. But unless you are a US broker with a US broker authority, you cannot broker freight from the US to the US, meaning if you can't pick up in Buffalo and deliver it to Dallas, okay, that would be unauthorized brokering. You cannot legally do that, okay? And as an agent, you have the authority to broker any freight that your brokerage is licensed to broker, right? So that makes sense, right? So I hope that makes sense, because I get the question all the time. Dennis, should I start as an independent dispatcher? Dennis, should I start as a freight agent? Dennis, should I get my freight brokerage? Now, I'm going to dive into this question, because the fact is, I will tell you that if you have very little experience, and depending upon your financial situation or your financial resources, I never suggest dispatch services for the reasons I've already disclosed, right? I suggest you start as a freight agent, right? Number one, it's very low cost of entry. Number two, your risk is very, very low. Number three, the opportunity to earn income is very high, because you get paid typically between 50 and 70% of the profit on every load. And number four, if you can't make money, if you can't get shippers and broker loads and make money as an agent, you are going to struggle as a broker, because the broker job is just a little bit harder, because now you got to do billing, you got to do collections, you got to do payables, you got to do insurance, you got other responsibilities beyond just finding and moving freight. That's what an agent does. Okay. So if you are experienced in the industry, maybe you've had a trucking company, maybe you've worked as a broker, maybe you have a book of business already, or you're going to lessen your risk. Maybe you're an agent who's been established and you're looking to move and get your own brokerage. That would be a great time to get your own freight broker authority. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody. I started out by getting my freight broker authority and I had no experience. So, it depends on the individual, right? It all depends on the individual. But I can tell you that's the general rule. I don't recommend dispatch services. I highly recommend new people to start as an agent. And if you have some experience, you have some resources, and you're really ready to go, then start as a freight broker, get your authority. So just a quick heads up for those of you most of you probably know, but I also own freightbrokerbootcamp.com, which is the most comprehensive and cost-effective online freight broker and freight agent training program. Trained over 7,000 students. If any of you are interested, check it out after this. Again, it's all online. You enroll, you get instant access. You don't have to wait for an instructor. You don't have to wait for me to be live. You don't have to wait for anything. You can literally dive into all the training articles, the videos, the contracts, the documents, everything you need in order to get started. So there's my little commercial for today.